Welcome, friends. We are recording live from the LBTQ Women's Inform, Inspire and Celebrate event in recognition of International Women's Week 2024. I'm your resident host, Meg Talks. And for this episode, I am joined with Nik from Pride in London.
Hello.
Woo, woo, woo. Now, we've had a couple of conversation exchanges downstairs, and if to be honest, it was me. I ran up here and said, let's get going.
Yeah.
I'm really intrigued. And I think we're going to cover a couple of conversations that are completely unique to any conversation we've had today. But before we do that, just to create some context, Pride in London is one of the most renowned prides in the world. It brings in millions of people per year and brings in at least 30,000 participants per year within that. People coming from all over the world, especially Europe. Pride's known for its events and its rambunctious street parties, to say the least. But it'd be really good just to tap into what is your role with Pride in London?
Yeah, sure. So I'm director of legal. So I kind of take care of the contracts that come through, any sort of legal risk, a little bit of the weird and wonderful that comes across the desk. It's great. It's quite different from the day job because I think you come across so much that you wouldn't just in the corporate world. I'm a lawyer in my day-to-day life anyway, but having that in the Pride element, it brings this whole new layer to it. And I think the people that you get to work with, the parties you're actually contracting with, they're such fantastic people. You're working with performers, charities, grassroots organizations. So for me as a lawyer, it's fantastic to be able to sort of bring the legal corporate role and the actual Pride and sort of diversity role together. It's so fantastic for me.
And how long have you been bridging that gap and working with Pride in London?
Pride not long. So I started in December. So it's quite a new role. This will be my first Pride actually in the role. But sort of LGBTQ plus advocacy generally for many, many years. So this is such a full circle moment for me, being able to formalize it in this way and join it. And I think you're speaking to Dee later, and she was one of the people who interviewed me and brought me on board. So I'm very grateful to her for that.
Thank you, Dee. I'm very grateful. We wouldn't be having this moment. But I definitely want to tap into corporate law and queerness under that broader umbrella, because as I've mentioned before in this podcast, I'm head of HR for a charity, and luckily, I'm mass presenting, queer as hell, and the CEO is also an older white lesbian.
Right.
So I'm the organization is positioned very well in terms of celebrating womanhood, diversity and queerness, and encouraging people to be themselves. But I've also worked in industries such as construction and rail where it is what it says on the can. It was a damn challenge. So it would be really good to kind of understand where you have seen success and great things within the world of law, but also where you've seen some of those challenges. Well, if we take law and corporate, where you've seen some of those challenges.
Yeah, I mean, legal profession generally it's a fairly safe space for queer people. Comparatively, that's not to say there aren't issues, there certainly are, but I think compared to a lot of professions, law tends to be more liberal. You usually find you're entering companies that have D&I budgets, they have established sort of employee network groups already, and you tend to feel like the people you're working with, if discrimination or something did arise, they'd have your back. I think one of the main things about being a lawyer is you're supposed to uphold equity, justice, human rights in general. So legal world, it's quite safe. That's not to say there hasn't been kind of a regression in recent years. I think sort of the legislative framework, the governmental framework we're dealing with just now isn't necessarily particularly supportive of all LGBTQ plus rights. We've seen a lot of conversion therapy is still legal despite numerous pledges to ban it. Trans rights are still very much not equal. And unfortunately, in February this year, the only trans judge in the judiciary resigned because she felt like trans rights have been too politicized. She couldn't do her role properly because she was too much of a spectacle being a trans person, which is just the opposite of what we want in terms of seeing diversity in the legal profession. So law in general, good, better, progress has been made, but far from where we need it to be. Corporate, I think, the stats for LGBTQ plus world it's difficult. My G-Work have done a survey recently, and they've said that 66% of Gen Z adults would leave their job if they couldn't be out at work. So that's 2 out of 3. So we're talking huge amounts of the future workforce who will not accept corporates that don't champion these rights. So I think the world will change. Currently, not so much. I mean, I've been in the legal profession for 10 years and I've seen progress. When I joined my first law firm, there was no employee network, no pride sponsorship, nothing like that. I sort of set up and founded the first network there and got some budget to sponsor our local pride, and we sort of kicked that off, which is great, and that still exists today in that firm. So there's progress to be made for sure, and in the construction world in particular, you coming from construction, I feel very similar in terms of it being a major challenge. I'm a lawyer in construction, so I deal with construction disputes, construction litigation. So it's quite a lot of contentious work. Mm-hmm. I'm not a very passive person. I'm quite outspoken anyway. I quite like a challenge, which sort of helps with the queer advocacy side of things, and it builds on your resilience a bit, which is great. But construction still is one of the worst performing sectors when it comes to LGBTQ+ rights. I mean, it's still so far behind on diversity in general. We're working on it. We are trying, but there's a lot sort of stacked against us still.
Reflecting on my time in construction and rail, there's an inconsistency in terms of the application of acceptance to people that fall under the queer bracket, just kind of being more expansive of language. So if you're more masculine natured, you can kind of cut by in many senses of the words because you somewhat become part of the lads, whether that's right or wrong.
Yeah.
Right. You do kind of get by. And there is this commonality of if you like women, it's like, yeah, well, it's like I can understand, and there's that familiarity creates a common framework for those relationships to form. But beyond that, when you start to slip out of more masculine frameworks, then it can become a lot more challenging within that. And I just wanted to get your take on that.
I think that's right. I think that, masculinity is still, that's the accepted format. So if you fit into a masculine bracket, you might be able to get on okay. It's a very hyper-masculine environment in a lot of ways. Legal less so, but on site, that's still, a huge issue. And I think femininity in any form, whatever gender that is, but if there's a sort of feminine expression in some way, that's still very threatening to patriarchy, to any kind of hyper-masculine situation. So whether that comes from somebody who identifies as male, for somebody who identifies as female, if you're doing a kind of not fitting into that blokey construction role, people just aren't used to it. They don't really know how to deal with it. It's a lot better. Like, it is making progress, but absolutely still on site. I think that if you can talk about, if you can like the pin-up calendar on the wall, you probably get on with them. But if you've got an issue with that and you're like, actually, I don't think we should be doing that, it's not acceptable, you might struggle a bit more.
Yeah. I don't even think in terms of culture that would even be taken seriously. It's like, get out of here.
Yeah.
In that respect. But even just through this same lens, looking at corporate, I've had questions posed to me, as a masculine presenting person, how have I found navigating the corporate space? And I said, in a really weird way, I benefit from patriarchy. Yeah. In some respects, because the response I get from men is very different to what a very feminine presenting woman, how they would be interacted with. And I feel that some of that, I'm not sexualized in any capacity. My word is taken with more of a firmness, or just accepted that, okay, this person knows what they're talking about in that. So I just wanted to kind of just share that reflection that is something that I've seen in corporate, and I exist in a very weird framework as a woman, but mask.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think there is, I even notice it myself. If I'm dealing with men, my mannerism changes slightly. I might just sort of act naturally more masculine. With women, I people who identify as women, I tend to not do that, and it's not. The word maybe isn't less threatening, but it is that kind of less masculine, less sort of taking up space and just being a little bit more giving space to that person. Whereas I think when you're dealing with people who identify as men or who represent more masculine, they naturally take up space a bit more. So you have to also take up space a bit more. Yep. And it all becomes a little bit more of a jostle. And that just changes completely when you're dealing with people who have been taught not to take up space and you actually want to allow them to do that.
Mm-hmm. There's that, to be really reductive, it's kind of softness versus boisterousness.
Yes, absolutely.
Because I know when I'm with the man them, with AKA the lads, like, it's a ball. Yeah. It's a ball. We're gonna tussle, we're gonna get into it. But when I'm around my feminine natured friends, no, they bring out the softer side of me.
Absolutely.
I'm gentle, I'm tender, So there is that, I think that kind of transcends the workplace into social environments, perhaps family environments as well. The way that I am with my mum versus my dad.
Yeah.
I can see that.
I think it's something people don't always notice about themselves. We do it so naturally, I think. You sort of mirror the environment you're in. And it's only if you do sit back and go, actually, I'm quite different how I interact with that person. And why is that? And what is it about that group that brings that out of me? And is it a good thing or a bad thing? You know, is that something actually I shouldn't present that way because I'm having to do it to make up for something or to kind of, it's in an almost defensive way. And it's not just an authentic thing. But if actually different people bring out different authentic parts of you, that's fantastic. And nobody is the same person with every single person.
You've hit the nail on the head. I was having this conversation with my therapist probably a couple of weeks ago, right? In terms of duality.
Yes.
Because I had the conversation with myself and her, am I being fake? And she was like, I doubt it very much, just because of how, she said, you don't know how not to be yourself, which is true. But she said, actually, you're able to lean into the different aspects of your character, your personality, your values, and really meet people where they are as well. So you can have those authentic connections and interactions. And I think, like you said, if it's coming from a space of perhaps you're wanting to fit in, wanting to simulate, there's probably something to unpack there. You know, no judgment, but just something to look into, a bit of inner self-inquiry. But if it's just that you just like to amp up different parts of your personality in different spaces and different vibes, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
So my last question to you before we wrap up, in terms of the prioritization of LGBT plus women, and that's from a Pride in London stance. Is there a prioritization of women? And if so, what does that look like? And if there's a question mark around that, maybe we could apply that to the different areas that you also work in.
I think there is. I think focusing on sort of traditionally less represented communities of any kind is a big focus for Pride at the moment. I think a lot of the time in sort of historically in media and culture, gay men have been sort of the main queer community represented. And I think that certainly we're seeing a lot more sapphic, stories being told or trans stories being told. And these kind of less represented communities are now coming to the forefront a lot more, which is fantastic because as a queer community, we really want to celebrate every single sort of strand that makes up that beautiful sort of banner of it all. So certainly for women, I think we've seen a huge influx of new directors, new volunteers in the program, which identify as women. On our board, I think we've got 4 or 5 directors that identify as women, which is fantastic. And certainly throughout corporate as well, I think addressing the gender balance now is such a huge issue. And finally, there are gender reporting statistics. We've got actual requirements now that companies tell you how they're doing on gender reporting, how gender diversity is. So yes, there's a prioritization of women and on telling these sort of queer female, women-loving women, any kind of sapphic story, no matter what your background, and just really supporting that and championing that voice.
Well, this conversation has flown by.
Yeah.
I feel like we could be here for another...
chat away. Yeah, let's do it.
For another 60 minutes. Do you have any final words before we wrap?
I think just so long as anyone working, whether it's corporate, construction, anywhere, anything, just to know that as a queer person, you've got this incredible chosen family. There's a whole community here for you. And if you do encounter discrimination in the workplace, in any setting, reach out to the resources that are around you, talk to us. I think there isn't a single queer person that would turn someone else away who was struggling like that. So please do use that community.
Absolutely. Nik, it has been
you too. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.